Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good
All right,
morning.
so we're going to be talking about some stuff that we have. Some of this we've talked about a little bit, but it'll be more thorough, but it's all put together now in terms of talking about the therapeutic relationship. Um, so it includes transference, countertransference, projective identification, and enactment. And and I want to go through all these ideas and how we make use of them in therapy. So I'm going to go back to this diagram, not as much time on it as we've spent in the past, where, if you remember, this is a depiction of a person who grew up in a home where he or she felt like people around, parents or other people, were too busy to talk to him. And when he would try to talk to them, they experienced him as annoying. That's how he felt. So this sort of gets laid down, we'll say, by about 5 years old. This can be modified and we build layers on top of it. This isn't the totality of someone's personality, but it's one sort of early, archaic, childish level of how this person sees himself in the world and how he experiences other people. So we'll go to 20 years later at age 25, and he meets a really interesting person. I think the example we gave was, he's in a class and someone is sitting next to him, a young woman is sitting next to him, and she makes a really interesting point in class. And he's like, gosh, like she's so interesting. Um, his wish or his need with her is, you know, that he'd like to get to know her. And what does he imagine her response will be? What does he imagine her response will be?
Annoyance.
That she'll be annoyed, or that, she's too busy for him. She'll be annoyed. That it could say she'll be annoyed with me. She's too busy for me. And so he won't really do anything with her. He won't really spend any time with her. And so in this model, what are the sort of features of his personality that he carries around with him to other relationships? This is sort of like a simplistic model of, we'll say, like
You
the
mean,
avoidant personality disorder or social anxiety, pathological shyness. What is the what what is like a really characteristic feature of his personality that he carries around with everybody?
like I'm not good enough, you know, I guess that's it. That's what I'm thinking.
Right. So I'm
I don't
not
I
good
don't
enough.
deserve to take up space, I feel like.
So, right. So you guys are interpreting in different words, sort of like how he sort of feels about himself. But we'll say like these things right here, which you guys think are giving additional, you're speculating about what else he would be thinking and feeling about himself. But these things right here, this way of imagining people, how they see him, how they feel about him, how they'll treat him, how they look at him, this is sort of what he carries around with him, right? And then in this interaction, he's acting it out with this other person, right? Like this is him from the past, and he's bringing it into the present.
Is there rejection place?
What did you ask?
They're too busy for me. Is he afraid of rejection?
Well, yeah, he is. I mean, he's with his parents. I don't know if he would use the word rejection. He probably doesn't even use words. But with this woman, he's afraid she'll reject him, probably so afraid she'll reject him that he just believes it's true. And he may not even, depending on how his mind is constructed, he may not even let himself know that he'd like to meet her.
It's less painful to reject yourself than for someone else to reject you.
Well, that's true. That's like, you can't fire me because I quit. But I don't even think that that's what he's doing. He's not saying like she's horrible and I don't want to be with her. He's not rejecting her. He's not even doing that. He's barely or not even letting himself know he'd like to meet her, but he doesn't entertain the possibility. Like he won't allow, I mean, the term we use for this is a fantasy. I think the word fantasy sounds weird in contemporary English, but that's the psychoanalytic term. But like, just say imagination. He won't let himself imagine that she might enjoy talking to him and they'd be friends, or that she'd be interested in him romantically, or whatever it is. He can't even let himself have that fantasy or imagination in his mind. So he shuts it down and he says, she's too busy for me. Or maybe he doesn't even let himself know it. Like, I don't know what, I mean, from how I describe this imaginary person, do you think he knows he'd like to talk to her? Or do you think he doesn't even know? He just
I
kind of
think it
like
depends
doesn't
on
let his mind go there.
I think it depends on how much he internalized this, like how strong is this implicit model of nobody's going to be interested in me, or I'm going to be annoying. Because if it's so strong, then I'd rather not even acknowledge that I want to meet her, because then I'm opening myself up to the possibility of being rejected.
So you're describing the difference between what we would call the schizoid personality, which he's not even aware of a wish to connect to other people, like it's that shut down, versus avoidant personality, where like he's shy and lonely and he wishes he had, like he does feel the conflict. Um, he does feel the conflict. He does wish that he had more connections in his life. I think that's exactly right. There are levels of this, how deeply unconscious this has been defended in his mind. Um, so
Not to disagree with Menachem, but I think fear of rejection is like a second level. Fear of rejection is maybe I should go speak to this person, but I'm not going to because she may reject me. Like deeper than that is a total sense of loserishness or inadequacy that doesn't even sort of like allow you to even think about approaching the person in the first place. Like it's much more almost core to a person as opposed to just being afraid of rejection. It's more of a sense of not able to ultimately able to even move and even think about things in those terms, if you know what I mean.
well, I think people that feel at core like they're a loser are very deeply afraid of being rejected. And that's why they would need exquisite amounts of safety and reassurance before they'd let themselves get to be known by somebody. So
Sure.
I think you're right, though, that there are people that where it's more ego dystonic, where they would say, I know that I have this stupid idea that I'm a loser and no one wants to talk to me. I know that's not true, but I just can't help it. I can't help it. Like they would. So that's someone that is like more workable, more easily workable. And I think all these people can be worked with in therapy, but it's more obvious. It's more ego dystonic. It's like, I know that my fear of rejection is a crazy feature of my mind that I shouldn't have. I know that it doesn't make sense, but I can't help it. I need you to help me stop succumbing to this fear. So that's like very ego dystonic. That's much easier to work with. It's less unconscious. And then there are people that like they feel so much, like they feel like such losers, so unappealing, so um, uninteresting. Like everyone is too busy for them. It feels so normal that they think the problem is that I tried. I shouldn't have put myself out there. I shouldn't have tried. And it's almost like they want your help engineering a life that they'll never make a mistake, that they'll never get rejected. Like, just help me see that I should never act in a case unless it's really, really clear. Like they want you to like be like a strategist to never get rejected, as opposed to someone that wants to get over their inhibitions, you know? Um, so what aspect of this corresponds to transference? The idea of transference, you know, what here is the transference?
The transference in therapy, you mean?
Yes.
Well, probably a constant perception that the therapist doesn't really want to be with him in the room, or maybe the therapist is distracted, or the therapist doesn't think highly of him, or the therapist, is itching to have the session finished. I mean, it's projecting all of that onto the therapist.
Yeah, I think those are really good examples of how we imagine this person's transference would be. So this internal view of himself and others and how they feel about each other, it gets played out in class. And now you're talking about how this will get played out in therapy. In other words, we could make a new diagram, but instead of a girl from class, it's a therapist. And what does he imagine about the therapist? So this line right here would correspond, if it were the therapist over here, to the transference. That's sort of the model that the transference is the person's real feelings about himself and others that he had long before he met you. And then it's how it acts itself out with you. It's not just a response to your real personality. Sometimes people try to use their real personalities to overcome the transference. Like if you try to make the environment very, very safe, if you try to do that, what you're trying to do is not analyze his transference. You're trying to let him suspend his transference so he can be more open with you. And I have no objection to someone doing that if they think that's going to be the best thing to do in therapy. Like if I have to get him, but it's that view of therapy would be that what we need to do is try to get his fear out of the way and then work with him more deeply and get the fear out of the way, as opposed to the idea that the transference is the problem. Like that is actually the person's core problem as it plays itself out in therapy. So we don't want to get rid of the transference. We want to actually use the transference to get him better. Like your biggest problem in the world is playing itself out in my room. So I'm going to use your fear of me, you find me scary, you find me not supportive enough. I'm not going to be coddling and gentle. I'm just going to be me. And I'm going to try to use your fear of me to show you what your problems are like. But we can talk about it in a different way. And I'm not going to reject you. I'm going to just keep talking to you. So it might be really, really hard. You might get nervous before sessions. You might imagine but I'm going to ask you to talk about what you imagine about me. And you're going to kind of hear yourself talk out loud, and you're going to realize it's a certain point, how distorted it is. You're going to realize this is your crazy that you bring around with you. These are your crazy parts. These are your protectors. These, whatever the terminology is going to be for your mode of therapy, you're going to realize that, and that you do this with everybody, but this is how you do it with me.
Could you say more in plain English about suspending the transference? What does that look like instead of using the transference and working directly with it?
To dispel the transference is what I was saying. To try to, so if you think that everyone thinks you're really dumb, okay? So everything you're I know I'm going to look stupid, but I have to ask this question. I'm going to say, I wish you wouldn't call yourself stupid. It's such a good question. All your questions are such good questions. I don't know why you imagine that I expect you to know this stuff already. So I'm not letting your transference ripen and blossom, because at that moment, I believe, now we could disagree with the technique, that's fine. But at that moment, either I'm a bad therapist and I don't know how to work with transference, or I've made a judgment that in the first 2 sessions, I can't let you start to freak out that I think you're dumb. It's not going to work. You're going to be so anxious that you can't tolerate therapy, or you are about to go to your sister's wedding and you're so afraid of everybody thinking that you're stupid and ugly at the wedding. I really just have, we have, another 60 years we can work together about how you think you're dumb and you're ugly in psychotherapy. But we only have 2 weeks for your sister's wedding. We've got to get you, and I only have 2 sessions to get you there. So I have 90 minutes total or 100 minutes total to work with you on this. I'm not going to spend, we can talk about your transference the rest of our lives. We can grow old together talking about your transference, but I've just got to help you. So there are times that you decide that you don't want to do that, or you're not trained to do that, but that would be not working with the transference. That would be trying to get the transference out of the way.
Or if you intentionally tell a patient, you know what, I'm going to tell you my stance. So they say, I know I matter to you. I know you care because
well, that
I pay
depends.
you.
That depends. It might be that I tell you my stance to show you how crazy your projections are onto me. In fact, I'm not trying to reassure you right now. I'm showing you how crazy what you imagine about me is. And I might do that. It's this is just so interesting. I'm not aware of having any feelings that correspond to what you just said. I might say that sometimes. I'm not trying to reassure you. In fact, you're going to feel dumb When I say that, if you have if you have the fear of looking stupid, you're gonna feel stupid that you imagined this about me, and you were wrong. But like, I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm trying to show you how distorted this is and wonder with you about where this came from. So, like, if you're trying to work in the transference, you're trying to use the patient's problems with you to help them. You're trying to like accentuate those problems in your office. So I'm gonna move on because we're gonna answer a lot of these questions as we go through. So
Sorry,
um,
Malcolm, can I just add one little piece here?
maybe.
Maybe. Okay. So that would be also therapists that work so hard to make everything in the room so comfortable,
And
so
safe.
coddling, so soft, so safe that you change yourself in order to adjust to all of the client's discomforts with
Yes,
you.
that's exactly right. There was actually a pair of analysts in the 1930s, I think they started writing in Chicago, maybe a little later than that, named Franz Alexander and Thomas French. And they believed that the analyst's or the therapist's job was to try to counteract the damage that had been done by being like the opposite of the parents. If you have like very, very critical parents, you become very affirming. If you have very controlling parents, you become very trusting and give them a lot of freedom. If you have parents that provided no structure and they were loose, you provide a lot of structure and a lot of sort of, I mean, it's control, but it's like a nurturing type of control. They thought that your job was to try to find like the opposite. That would be like an extreme example of what you're talking about. So therapists that try to make the room very, very safe, their belief at that moment or when they do that is that like that's what I have to do. Like that's the best. They really believe that's the best therapy. They don't believe that allowing the lack of safety and the anxiety to come into the room and even get exaggerated in the room and discussing it, they don't believe that that'll be helpful. They believe it'll be like re-traumatizing or something along those lines. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't any patients for whom that's true to some degree, but I am saying that working with the transference is a technique of psychodynamic psychotherapy. That would be someone that thinks either they don't believe in psychodynamic psychotherapy, they think this patient can't handle a treatment that is that analytic right now. Like I need to do more. I need to do like all of the safety maintenance necessary to do all the exploration possible. So I need to, that would be something along those lines. I think that would be the person's view with it. But what you lose is the ability to work with their psychopathology. It's like you create a place where they're their best selves with you. They're so not anxious, but like that might not really help them in the rest of life. Or it might be a stepping stone to get there later. Like it kind of depends on the therapist's view of the patient. So to talk about, the transference and some definitions, and I'd like to sort of demystify this concept. Transference is how the patient's typical ways of relating to others manifests itself in therapy. So again, if you believe it's transference, they have this problem or distortion or pattern long before they met you. This is how they are all the time in many, many situations. You did not create this. One of the challenges for beginner therapists and earlier career therapists, and this is normal, this is not a criticism, is that you feel like you have made your patients afraid of you. You don't have the confidence that, no, they had this problem before they met you. Like they really had this problem. My analogy is imagine you are a baker and you are learning how to make cheese danishes. So you make your first batch of 1,000 cheese danishes. And the first person comes in and he bites into the Danish and he says, "Oh my God, that is the most disgusting thing I've ever tasted in my life," after he vomits in front of you. You will feel absolutely mortified that you picked the wrong field. You have no idea how to bake a Danish. Let's imagine that you've been doing it for 10 years and you've now made 1,000,000 Danishes. This is your 1,000th batch of 1,000 Danishes. And you have sold 999,999 Danishes. This is your millionth Danish. And it was in a batch of 1,000 Danishes. And there's no difference between this one and the rest because it was mixed up in the, and then that person comes in and bites in and throws up also. You do not feel like you don't know how to bake Danishes. You feel like, wow, that person has really weird taste buds. You'd probably say, I'm really interested. I don't mind refunding you for the Danish since you hated it, but I'm really curious. Like, what did it taste like to you? Did it taste too sweet? Did it taste salty? Are you like, do you hate cheese? Do you hate sugar? Like what, like just describe to me your reaction. You'll really be curious because so many people have had this Danish before that like, it's not gross. That people love this Danish. You tasted it yourself thousands of times. Like, what it tastes like. You know how people respond. That's what it's like in therapy. When you have someone respond to you with a really, really strong reaction to you, your experience gives you confidence that like, no, this person is really narcissistically fragile. This person gets offended and feels hurt and feels misunderstood and feels ignored and feels not taken seriously. Like this person needs so much reassurance for everything they say that like, I know that like most people don't respond to me that way. This person does. So am I going to adjust and be more careful, or am I going to like lean right into it and wonder? That depends on my therapeutic judgment, my clinical style,
And the
my
client's
sense,
ego strength.
my sense of the client's ego strength. It depends on those things. But I will know with confidence that like, most of my students don't feel that way about me. Most of my patients don't feel that way about me. This is, not unprecedented, but, a rare reaction to me. And it's diagnostic. This is a diagnostic reaction. You'll gain confidence over time. There's the only two tools would be like supervision and experience. That's the only way to like not worry that you traumatized your patient. And by the way, you will traumatize some patients. You had a bad day, or you've got to learn a certain thing about your personality. That's also part of supervision and experience. So it's a stable aspect of the patient's personality. Okay. It is okay. Here's the question. Is it different in therapy than other realms? Are you just another person they're reacting to, or is it different in therapy than other realms of their life? So I think it's different in therapy because of the asymmetrical power differential between the therapist and the patient. Okay. The patient is so much more vulnerable than you are. Okay. You are not as vulnerable as your patient in the room. You are not. You have some vulnerabilities. You have some narcissistic vulnerabilities. You have some, it really kind of depends on if you're afraid that you're a mean person, you want to really, really be nice, that's a vulnerability because patients can make you feel like a very bad person. If you have a lot of narcissistic insecurity about whether you're competent enough or whether you're smart enough or whether people value you enough, then patients that don't appreciate you can be hurtful. So there is some vulnerability, but it's mostly your issues that make you vulnerable. The scenario is that the patient is much more vulnerable than you are. And you have an instinct to make patients feel safe and reduce the transference. But the goal is to use the transference to help patients understand themselves. All of these factors, I think, make therapy different than the rest of life.
Malcolm?
Yes.
I know the way that I usually handle these things, but obviously you've far more experience. Do you wait for the transference to sort of make an appearance based on something the patient is doing or something that he said or comments that he's making about how you must be in the room? Or are you actively trying to sort of almost push and raise and prod of the patient's experience of you to sort of now have this be therapeutically helpful?
So that's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it. I'm going to try to respond quickly because some of it will be touched upon later, but I think the way you asked it, I could put a lot together. It takes a long time for the transference to come out. Most patients, it is only people with really primitive personality disorders that the transference gets like in the first 2 sessions. Most people come in and they're really, really regulated, polite. They have a positive disposition toward you. They trust you. They believe you're going to help them. They give you the benefit of the doubt if you make a mistake. If you forget their name, you call them by the wrong name, you forget their husband's name, whatever the things that you do that are clumsy, you give a lot of credit for a long time. It takes a long time for that vulnerability to come out. So I don't think you see it right away unless it's like a very, very primitive patient. I think that I don't like try to accentuate it, except for the fact that the psychotherapy scenario, like the situation of therapy, accentuates it enough. I don't have to like do artificial things to make them more uncomfortable. I've had patients imagine that I deliberately did stuff to make them feel scared, but that was part of their transference. That was not, I don't do things deliberately to freak out patients. I really don't. They freak out enough on their own. They don't need me to do that to them. It takes a long time. I don't do things deliberately. Now, if you're an analytic patient and you're lying down on the couch, and I will tell you for the, a while in a session to try to just say everything out loud, and we'll listen to what you're saying out loud, that stirs up a lot of vulnerability. You don't see me, you don't see my facial response. I'm not like, it's not a dialogue. It's the frame is of somewhat different. Or you tell me about your dreams and your dreams are weird. Then I go through your dream and I want to know all the elements of the dream. There might be something sexual in the dream. There might be something violent in the dream. There might be something embarrassing in the dream. So all these things do enough work to make you feel vulnerable. So I don't need to like ramp it up. And I definitely do some interventions that are counter projective. In other words, they reduce the projections of the patient. And I don't think I have an algorithm about like when I do it, when I don't do it. I think I do it when I sense the patient can't handle this. Like this patient really needs some relief. Like this patient is like so overwhelmed and dysregulated right now. They're going to start dissociating in my office, or they're going to have a panic attack in my office, or they're so upset and there's like no way out of this. This is not going to be therapeutic. I think it's like more my intuition in the moment, and I may get it wrong sometimes. There might be times I miss how stirred up they are. There might be other times that I overcorrect, and they'll tell me, they're like, I don't know why you just reassured me. I didn't need that from you. They'll tell me things like that. They'll be like mad, like, you really think I'm that much of a baby that I can't handle this? I don't want you to like coddle me. Other people will say like, oh my gosh, I'm so relieved. I'm so glad you said that to me. And the other thing is like, none of this stuff you don't have the time to like think it through like an algorithm and sit down with your supervisor about it. You do that that's like Monday morning, quarterbacking, like afterward, you're reviewing the case. So you're doing this all by the seat of your pants in the moment. We don't have the ability to really think it through. So you just get better at it. The more you know your patient, you're better at it. The more you're adept at doing these skills, the more you know this is workable, that's not workable. It's kind of like you get that judgment over time clinically. So countertransference, okay? Countertransference, that classically meant, it really is how we feel about our patients. That's what countertransference is. How we feel about our patients. There's an aspect which is personal and specific to you, an experience with many patients. If you have a rescue fantasy that is part of your personality, that you want to be a rescuing, now all of us have a little bit of this or we wouldn't have gone into therapy, but if you have a really strong fantasy, like an unconscious fantasy that's guiding your work, and you want to make people feel, you want to save them, you want to make them feel whole, you want to make them feel loved, you want to make them feel safe, that will be an aspect of the countertransference that's more about you than about the patient. You will learn about those things early in your career. I think it takes about 10 years to usually, with like a lot of therapy and supervision and experience, to iron those things out enough that they're not routinely getting in the way. I really think it's like a 10-year process. But those are things about you. Then there's so the therapist needs to understand and work this in his personal psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. I would now add supervision, because I think supervision does actually even more for this than therapy. because it's very focused on these patients. And then you take what you learned about in supervision, like I keep doing this thing, my supervisor's pointing it out, I need to understand this about myself. You bring that to your analyst or your therapist. But there's an aspect that is mostly a direct reaction to the one patient's particular way of treating and relating to us. So in other words, that's your reaction to the patient's transference. That's why it's called countertransference. If the patient feels so hurt and so misunderstood and so blamed and so rejected, you will have certain feelings that get stirred up in you by patients like that. That is the classical original version of meaning of countertransference. We now use it to include the entire total set of feelings toward the patients, but this is the aspect that really you can work with therapeutically to help the patient. So the more you understand your own repetitive feelings that get stirred up by everybody, the better you can discern the patient's specific ways of treating you, that or your reaction to the patient's way of treating you. That is general. The patients treat a lot of people that way. They feel a lot of that way for a lot of people. This is the countertransference that can be used therapeutically as a way of understanding a patient's dynamics. It's like, I've used this term, it's like a personality biopsy. It's like you got a little taste of their personality through these interactions. It's a taste of what it's like to be in a personal relationship with them. You know, this is my view of it. It's like you got a little taste of what it would be like to be their neighbor, their friend, their son, their father, their husband. You know, you get a little slice of that relationship through the countertransference. So these are what I say common questions. Maybe the patient is only acting this way with me. How do I know this is the patient and not me? Maybe I'm causing this. Okay. How do I know that my feelings about the patient are meaningful? Maybe this is just my craziness. Like maybe I'm imagining things, or maybe I'm very sensitive to this issue. Maybe it's just my emotional baggage. Maybe others would feel very differently with this patient. Maybe this is really unique to me. These are common questions about the transference. What I would say is that the more severe or primitive the patient's personality difficulties are, the more stereotyped it is that many patients feel the same way. And again, the only way to be confident about these questions is supervision and experience. These are the normal, correct questions to ask, but there's a certain period of time that you're like, okay, I got it. Like when you have a really, really difficult patient and they're giving you a very hard time and you feel very de-skilled and you feel like you're just the worst therapist and you're really lost. And then you talk to like their old therapist, or you talk to people in the family, or you talk to the psychopharmacologist, or you get a consultation. You know, like Alana has brought me in to do diagnostic consultations with some patients. And I say, okay, well, the patient showed up an hour early and was mad at me for making them wait. Like that's something I will notice and I will share. You're going to be like, oh, okay. So like other people feel this also. Like it is very validating when other people have similar reactions to people that you have. And it makes sense. I mean, there are people coming to us for their problems. And actually, the more confident you are that this is not you and it's the patient's problem, the more compassionate and the more skillful you'll be at helping them. If you're so worried about making them safe and you're worried that you haven't made them safe, you're actually going to be more hurt when they're mad at you. You're going to be more hurt that they're not, you know, finding your interventions helpful. If you can understand, like, yeah, this is someone who has had really difficult experiences in life, and they really need help being able to tolerate interactions with people. So I'm one of the people interacting with them, and they're more vulnerable to me than they are to most people. So it makes sense that they're going to have really strong reactions to me. You'll actually be better at helping them. When you feel hurt or insulted, actually, you're going to be less compassionate. You're going to be more angry. If you're trying to make your office as safe as possible, it's just going to be kind of like a vicious cycle. Like you back down, they get more sadomasochistic with you, They feel more hurt. They're more angry at you for being hurt. Actually, their hurt is sort of a weapon against you. And you're going to be like trying harder and harder to be super kind and soft, and they're going to be getting more and more mad. And actually, that's sort of like a therapeutic stalemate where you just are stuck in the work. And that's a sign that you really need help clinically with supervision. And that happens to all therapists. There are no therapists that do not have this happen to them. So it happens less as you get more experienced and more confident, but it happens to everybody. And there are always, your whole career, you'll need consultation and supervision. Using countertransference, first of all, it happens before you notice how you're being treated. You do not realize that the patient is doing stuff to you that's really rude or really insulting or really flattering and idealizing. You just have, like, you feel wonderful or you feel aggravated or scared or guilty. You do not know what's happening. You notice how you're feeling. You do not notice what they're doing to make you feel this way. So you cannot see countertransference coming. It's unconscious by definition. Okay, these are unconscious reactions, which means you have feelings. You don't know what emotions are triggering those feelings, and you don't know what interactions triggered those emotions. And it usually happens for many sessions in a row, and you realize it's happening, and then you can finally put together like what's going on in the relationship that's making you feel this way. But you do not see it before it hits you. It hits you first. You have to learn how to respond rather than react. The statement, don't just do something, sit there. The English expression is don't just sit there, do something. But that's actually, to work in the countertransference, you need to be able to sit with uncomfortable feelings, not act them out, not say nasty things, not start doing weird stuff as a therapist to try to undo the feelings. You need to really sit with those feelings, and it takes a long time to figure it out. We are paid to sit with intense, unpleasant feelings for a long time and make sense of them. That is actually what you're paid to do as a therapist. That is like your most basic skill, even more than what you say, because that's harder to do than say something insightful. It's much easier to say something insightful. It's much harder to sit with all those feelings and figure out what caused you to feel that way, and then be able to reflect on the relationship in an insightful way that's helpful. That is much harder to do. That's actually your primary job as a therapist. I could pause here for some questions, but I want to move on within 2 to 3 minutes. Any questions about this so far? No? All right, I'll just move on. Okay, I want to move on to projective identification now. So this is another way that countertransference happens. And we've talked about this before. I think it's a difficult, complicated concept, and it's so ubiquitous in life and in therapy that it's worth going over and over again. So projective identification is the following. Okay. So I've used this metaphor with you before. I always return to it because this is what I think it's based on in human beings. And I imagine other mammals as well, other higher mammals. What do you feel when you hear a baby cry? Okay. So the answer to that question is terror. People feel terror when they hear a baby cry. That's the normal human response. And you jump up and you do something about it. Babies are hardwired to cry in a way that fills their caregivers with terror. If Alana suddenly heard a baby crying in the room behind her, she would be really alarmed because there's not supposed to be, I don't know who's visiting your mother right now, but there's no babies in the house. So if a baby were there crying, you would be absolutely, you would leave the session and figure out why this baby is crying. Toby, I imagine, has her microphone off because there's a baby constantly crying because she has a 2-day-old newborn in her lap.
That's very accurate.
So she's not as alarmed because she's already doing what the baby needs and she's right on top of it. Okay. But like, she's like, okay, why is the baby crying? Is he hungry? Is he uncomfortable? Does he need a new diaper? Am I holding her in the wrong way? Like we react that way. The babies are hardwired to make us react that way. We are hardwired to react with terror to a baby's cry. Like this is built into the design of our brains and our emotional systems. Our sensory systems are designed to like help our babies survive and grow up. Hunger, cold, or danger, you know, that's what we sort of like immediately look to see. Is there anything scaring my baby? Is my baby hungry? Is my baby cold? You know, that's what you look for when you hear a baby crying. Babies that don't cry and fill us with terror, I think that they didn't reproduce. I think those babies actually died of hunger. They were eaten by wild animals. It was either the parents, those parents, their babies didn't survive. So the parents who had a really strong instinct to help their babies survive, and the babies that were good at getting their parents to take care of them, those are the children that, you know, evolved. That's how our species developed the way we are. Those are the ones that survived over time. Adults who don't feel terror when their babies cried, they probably had fewer or no surviving descendants. This has shaped our evolution as a species, that we are a highly social to a highly social, interconnected human nature. This is why human beings are so interconnected. That's what we do. We have language. We get really close to lots and lots of people. Like this is so built into who we are as people. I don't want to go into it but there is a very interesting translation of the Bible into Aramaic. Those of you raised Orthodox know about this. It's the translation by Onkelos. And in the very beginning of the creation of the human being, it says that God breathed a living soul into the first human being. And the way it got translated into Aramaic is the ability to speak. A living soul is considered the ability to speak. That is like an ancient view that like that's what makes us human. Speech is that we're interconnected. Like that's what makes us human. We're very, very interconnected species. That's why we speak. You know, it's just very this is something noticed about human beings from ancient times. And that was, you know, about like this was that was that author's interpretation of what it means to be fundamentally human. It's to be interconnected with others. So projective identification going on. We communicate our emotions non-verbally also. That's what this means. You know, we communicate non-verbally. Unconscious communication is when both parties are unaware of what's being sent and what's being received. We send out signals and other people receive signals and they respond back, and we don't know. We actually don't consciously know. It's so instinctual. It's like sitting or eating, or like it's right like in who you are as a person. So Melanie Klein noted this to be a defense mechanism in primitive patients and children. They rid themselves of unwanted affects, unwanted feelings. Okay, so what is an example of that? Children that bully other children. Why do children bully other children? Why do they do that? Like very simplistically, they somehow feel better, right? They feel better when they bully other children. Why would someone feel better by bullying another kid?
They have more power. They feel more powerful.
Yes. Now, why does that kid need to be feeling more powerful and other kids don't? Why?
Usually because they were bullied in some way themselves, or mistreated by caregivers or other people in their social network.
Yeah, we think they've been brutalized and dominated. So they will dominate, and they get rid by making, and it's not even really the domination that makes them feel better. It's seeing the fear in the other person that makes them feel powerful. They rid themselves of feeling fear and domination by making the other person feel dominated and afraid. That's actually, so that's like, I'm just giving a very simplistic example of it. But you have patients that make you feel incompetent. and they seem to like do it over and over and over again. Now, again, if you have insecurities early in your career that make you feel incompetent, that's normal. But there are certain patients that seem to like really just with all of their therapists, no matter how experienced, they seem to unconsciously de-skill you. Why would they do that? The theory is that these are people that feel very ineffective, helpless, frustrated. No one has let them succeed. Everyone has pushed them down. And they do this in their relationships, including in therapy. That's sort of the theory of projective identification. I'm adding this whole first slide about babies because I don't think it's only a defense mechanism. I think it's a feature of all human relationships. And I think it's also healthy. It's also normal. I think when someone is full of intolerable emotions, this is also an avenue available to them that they will do. And this is when, the difference between process and content becomes very important to see what the patient is doing to you when the patient says that. Patients can come in and they can just sort of say something a certain way, sit a certain way, and it really makes you feel like they don't want to be there. They think that they're wasting their money with you. They haven't said that, okay? They haven't said that, but they're just like, I don't know. You give your best interpretation, say, I don't know. They say, I don't know. I guess I have to think about that. That's very different saying, I don't know. I have to think about that. Those are very different responses. And you have to sort of notice, like, what did that patient just do to me? And why are they doing this? So again, the theory is they do this everywhere. This is part of their personality. And they're also doing it with you. And they need you to pick up on it and help them do this so they stop sabotaging all the relationships. The
What
stuff
would
they
be an
do to you
example? I'm sorry.
would be an example of what?
Of projective identification that is healthy and normal. Like you said, it's not always, it shows up everywhere and it could be healthy and normal.
When you are dating and you can communicate enjoying someone and being interested in them in a manner that they pick up on.
Okay.
I have a patient who's getting married in another month. He's a very enjoyable young man to work with. I've been working with him for a while, since he was in high school. And he was telling me about a date he was on, and he noticed that the girl on the date started adjusting his air conditioning in the car and put on music that she liked. And it made him feel so good that she did that because he felt like she's comfortable with him, that she felt free to do that. Like it felt like really intimate in the moment. Now there's no touching involved in this. There's no, overt flirting. It was just like she had been really inhibited, he thought, and he couldn't tell if she wants to go out again. So like he wasn't getting any no, but there were no like signals. So like that, like I don't think she knew that she was doing that, but I think that day she felt freer to do this with him, and he felt this way. So like they unconsciously, like he talks about everything in therapy, so it quickly becomes conscious for him because he talks about it in therapy. But like he knew he felt like better on that date, and he thinks that that's why he did, and that is like a really healthful example of unconscious communication. And I think that was, so she sent out to him these signals of like, I want to be connected to you. And he received it. And that made her, so maybe if you want to put it in terms of a defense, she was saying like, I'm worried that we're isolated and we're not connecting. So and so she did this to make him feel connected to her. And he felt that way. And then, their dates got progressively more interesting, and they shared things in a more intimate way, and they're engaged and they're getting married. I think that's an example of a healthful unconscious.
And in therapy, is there a healthy way of using it?
So I want to move on. I'd have to think about your question. I don't have it prepared at the moment, but I want to move on. We'll see if we can get back to that. Now, Wilfred Bion has another way of thinking about this that I think is really important and helpful. It's the concept of the container and contained, or containment. Okay. So the idea is this: the patient or the child's chaos. Okay. Let's go to children. Children have emotional chaos, and the patients give a very understanding explanation of what's going on. I will give an example. Your child comes home screaming and crying, and you do not know why. I may have given this example to you guys already one time. You do not know why they're doing this. The child cannot organize their thoughts in a coherent way. They don't know why either. You're going to figure out, like, oh, I think the example we used was, oh, your friend Steve, who you thought was your friend, mocked you and teased you in front of the other kids in school. And you realize, like, you've got to get the kid to stop screaming because you can't understand screams. You've got to get them to tell you the story. You've got to interrupt them and slow them down because you don't understand what's going on. And they finally tell you what happened that day. And then you say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. That's so hurtful that Steve, who you thought you could trust, would do that to you. And in front of other kids, I'm so sorry that happened. That's so mean of him. I'm so disappointed in him. And that's really hurtful. I can understand why you feel so hurt. And then depending on the kid, you might be able to say, do you have any idea why he did that? And the kid might say, yeah, I think he wants to look cool in front of the other kids. They're these really like popular, cool boys that were in the class, and they bully other kids too. And he wanted to look like one of them. He wanted to fit in with one of them. And he did it, at my expense. By doing that, that is containment of the child's emotions. Patients do that all the time. Patients come in, they give you a lot of chaos, and you don't understand the chaos. And you figure out the chaos, and then you give it back to them in a more digestible, understandable form. That is also a type of transference or projective identification. That is the patient's emotions getting into you. And this is a way of making sense of it for the patient in some way. And so by giving that back to the patient, and it might be about what's happening between you and the patient. That might be what's going on. Like, you guys seem disconnected. The therapy is off. You're saying things that make them angry over and over again, and you're getting frustrated. And you might review everything that's happened. Like, well, there was a day that I said a bunch of things that you thought were wrong and unhelpful. And I think you've been really hurt since that day that I did that. And you've been, let's think of the 3 sessions since then. Look at these 3 things you did since that session. And you never do things like that to me before. It seems like you're still really hurt and mad about what I failed to understand in that session. And I guess I have failed to realize how hurtful it was. I really didn't understand it would hurt you that badly. But it seems like you're getting very angry at me about this. That would be an example of using this containment idea to process what's happening in the relationship. If you can do that, like, that will be very helpful to them in their other relationships. They've probably not had a lot of experiences where people can talk about the feelings in the relationship in that direct or digestible way. That would be, and every time you do this, you're giving them a little bit more structure in their mind to do this. Like, they're building a little more structure each time that goes on. That may have to happen dozens of times over many years before their capacity to function in relationships gets a lot better. But, you start to do that with them in your relationship.
Do you think this naturally, or is it something like a skill that we learn?
I think that there are elements of it that are natural as a person, as a mother, as a lover, as a spouse, as a friend that you've learned in life. But then you are trained to see it happening to you. So you're better with your patients at noticing when you've been triggered and what triggered you. You have the boundaries of the therapy to protect you, so you're better at doing that with patients. You have supervision, you have experience, and then you learn this concept. So it's something like, oh, this is an example of what I learned about when I read Beyond. or when I listen to Dr. Klafter's lecture. So I think it's a combination of something you learn, but that you do as a human being have natural skills to do.
I don't think most new therapists are really taught or told that it's okay when something is happening in the moment with a client to be able to say, okay, hang on a second. Something's happening between the two of us right now. What do you think is going on?
But that's because most therapists didn't get you as a supervisor, Alana. That's why.
Very funny. Okay.
So, but yeah, it's a skill to be taught, but it's a capacity as a person that you have also. And I do believe that these capacities that you harness in your therapy do affect you in your real relationships also. Like, I think doing this with patients makes you a different kind of a person. I really do believe that there's a big effect on your relationships from being a therapist. So it goes in two directions. So the metaphor that I use for this is, it's like, there's certain chicks that can't eat worms. Like, the mother bird has to chew it up and put it into like a mush or tiny little pieces, and then spit it into the chick's mouth. That's what containment is sort of like. This is too much. This is too overwhelming. You're going to let their chaos get into you. It fills you with a lot of feelings, but you can make use of them in a different way. You think about them, and then you digest them into a way you can explain it. You give it back to them in a way that it's sensible, and the affect goes down. Like, there's a lot of calming that happens every time this happens in the room. And that's something that they learn to do with you. And they learn to do that for themselves and in their relationships. So again, as I'm saying, I think this is more than a defense. It functions as a defense when there's distress and conflict, but I really think it's a form of interpersonal communication and connection. Role responsiveness. This is another version of the same stuff we're seeing, another way of explaining it. Okay. The person who innovated this theory was Joseph Sandler. He was a British psychoanalyst. He was doing investigations into projective identification because Melanie Klein had, emigrated from Berlin, and she settled in England. She had a whole school of analysts that trained under her who were learning about projective identification. So his investigations into projective identification led to the following. He said that the patient has internalized his or her prior relationships as role fantasies. What are examples of role fantasies? I'm an abandoned child. I'm a jilted lover. I'm a lonely reject. These are internalized fantasies that you feel like, I'm not saying that you have all three, but these are among the fantasies that people have from their prior relationships. The patient subsequently constructs fantasies of roles in different types of relationships as a defense against those painful, unwanted experiences. Like, I'm a rescued child. Or I'm a rescued damsel in distress. Or maybe I'm a rescuer. I should put that one in. I'm a passionate lover. I'm a popular or charismatic star. Okay, this is like a fantasy to undo or get rid of that really unpleasant experience. In life in general, including in therapy, a normal response to this. Okay, so if I was an abandoned child, but I now have a fantasy that I'm a rescued child. If I'm going to enact my fantasy of being a rescued child when I'm in Alana's office, I act like a child who is about to be, run over by a train or something, but Alana is right there. So she's going, I'm enacting the role. So I'm going to be rescued. I'm going to make Alana rescue me right now. And it's done unconsciously. The normal response to someone, what is the normal response to someone acting like a child that is about to be rescued? What is your normal response to that as a human being? And in therapy, the normal response. The normal response is you rescue them. The normal response is you enact the role that you're pressured into adopting. That is normal. That's what people do. If I act like a certain role, that is what you do in response without thinking about it. That's what people do. I don't know if anyone ever saw the movie Gone with the Wind. In the very last scene of the movie, she says, "I have always depended on the kindness of strangers." Okay. This is what she's talking about. This is the kindness of strangers. We enact the roles that we are pressured into acting, and we don't think about it. We just do it. We do it before you realize it. You don't even understand that you're doing this. You just instinctively do this to people. If your supervisor criticizes you that you reacted that way, you need a new supervisor, because the supervisor needs to know that that's the normal reaction. Now, to be a therapist, you have to overcome the reaction, but you can't overcome the reaction in advance. You cannot. You are doing this with your patient before you know you're doing it. I had a supervisee who told me that there was a client that got her to hug her every time she left the room. And it was like, she rationalized, well, just some people need a lot of hugs and there's nothing wrong with hugging. It's two women. She's a woman. I'm a woman. There's nothing sexual here. Then it was like, wow, she really is needy for hugs. And it was like, okay, I'm getting sick of this. I don't want to freaking keep hugging her. And then it was like, I'm so embarrassed about this, Dr. Klafter. I have been hugging this patient every session for 2 years, and I hate it, and I dread it, and I can't stop doing it, and I don't know why this is happening. So if you criticize that person for hugging their patient, you're not being a good supervisor. Like, this is a patient who gets people to like coddle her, mother her, soothe her. And in a lot of relationships, she gets a lot of people to do things for her that they're very uncomfortable doing and they don't like doing. And then she gets really mad when they stop doing it. So like the cycle kind of repeats itself. Then she becomes a rejected child and an abandoned child. So if you would like, criticize your patient or fire your patient. Now, what's the optimal amount of time? I know you guys are all like, how long do you let it go before you, like, that question is irrelevant. You are doing it for far too long before you realize you're doing it. Like, that's not a question you would ever ask. Like, you're doing weird stuff with your patients that they made you do with them before you know you're doing it. So you realize it when you're already in the middle of a whole enactment, or that's your role responsiveness to the enactment. So you get yourself out of it by analyzing what's happening. You figure it out with your supervisor. You figure out what your vulnerabilities are with your therapist. Then you start to talk about it with the patient. You say, like, so for the last 2 years, you have hugged me every time you've gotten me to hug you back every time you leave here. And I remember when it started, you had a very, very emotional session and you needed a hug for reassurance. And it felt natural for me to hug you at that time, but it doesn't feel natural anymore. It feels like a ritual. I don't know why we're hugging. I feel like part of therapy is that we have to turn our feelings into words rather than just acting them out. And I think I've been like not thinking about this enough. So I'm going to stop hugging you. And I want to figure out with you why I was hugging you in the first place, why we were doing this. I don't think it's a thing. I think we were both doing this together. Why were we doing this? And I think the only way we can figure this out is to stop doing this and figure out what feelings are coming up. I have a feeling that some unpleasant feelings, we were getting rid of them by hugging. And so I'm going to not do that anymore with you. Now, the patient might get really, really mad. Patient might be really mad. You won't hug them anymore. But I think that that's what you do to get out of this. And you can't do that till you're stuck in it. Mm-hmm. So there's really no point in berating yourself to having gotten into this kind of a situation. This is what happens in intense emotional relationships with patients over time. These things happen. Another version of the same phenomenon is called enactment. Okay, enactment is the same phenomenon described by role responsiveness. It's slightly different explanation or interpretation that we give for this. When we call it enactment, it's not led or determined by one part of the system. It's mutual, okay? You're both doing this together when it's an enactment. The therapist has his or her unconscious wishes and needs. the patient has his or her unconscious wishes and needs. They interact with one another repeatedly over time. It's like an emotional dance. You feel like the patient is leading you in the dance. The patient feels like you're leading the patient in the dance, but you're both dancing together. You cannot really figure out who started it. Is this your fault or is this my fault? Like, who started it? One view is that this is an action version of transference and countertransference, which would mean that basically the patient started it. This was the patient's way of starting it. My view, it would be that enactment is a failure of the therapist to contain the patient's emotions. Now, when I say failure, I don't want to say like the therapy's failing, but it's like you were not able to contain certain kind of emotional chaos. You got drawn into an enactment because of your stuff also. Like that was so hard for you to contain. But you can't really pinpoint like who started this dance. I mean, I guess, in some way it's going to end up being that you blame the patient because you're the therapist, and also you're trying to understand the patient. So you're going to kind of highlight the patient's dynamics because that's what we're trying to figure out. But it's really like a two-person process that two people have a way of getting into this like dance. And again, the way to deal with this is to, first of all, you realize you're in it. You've been in it a long time before you realize that you're in it. You talk about it with your supervisor. You stop doing it with your patient, but you kind of have to explain, like if you've been hugging them every session for 2 years and you're going to stop hugging them, you kind of have to explain you're going to stop hugging. Like there's going to have to be some discussion about it. It might be that it's something you do have a lot of insight to. So you might say, well, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I want to share with you what I've been thinking. I don't know if I'm entirely correct or if this will feel fair or correct to you. So I invite you to comment on this or disagree with me. And if I feel it's totally off, I want you to tell me. But this is what it feels like to me. And by the way, when you give that preamble to something you say, patients are usually less defensive and they can like hear it better when they're invited to disagree. It's a very interesting thing. They don't feel like it's forced on them. You have to mean it. You have to sincerely not be sure and actually say that. But it's like we're speculating. We're forming hypotheses together as a partnership rather than like I'm bestowing my brilliance upon you that you have to accept. It's just like a different stance in the therapy that's a lot healthier. So I think it's the same phenomena that we're going with all of these other terms, projective identification, role responsiveness. Enactment is just another concept that describes the same thing that happens in therapy. So a failure of mental containment leads to a discharge of affect through action. That's why I see it as a failure of containment. That's what happens with enactment. If you were able to like contain it and process it back, it wouldn't have been an enactment. But you couldn't, sometimes you could, sometimes you couldn't. That's usually what it's like in these therapies or psychoanalyses. And so this is, that's like my view. I find containment to be a really helpful concept for my work. So the summary would be the following. My emotional reaction to the patient in general, and particularly to the way he feels about and treats me, is the most immediate and accessible way to begin to understand his difficulties and his subjective experience. It's through how I feel about him and how he's treating me. That is like usually the best start as to what's going on with their difficulties. It isn't how they describe the relationships out there. It's how they live out in the present their problems with you. And you notice how you feel about it before you can like intellectually observe it. You notice your feelings toward it first. That's how this all works. This is a very like emotional, embodied way of understanding your patient. It isn't like, you're identifying distorted thoughts intellectually. It's like you are feeling feelings that they're stirring up in you. And that's like your instrument. Those are your antennae. That's like how you see what's going on with the patient. So I think we have a good 16 minutes for questions and comments.
Can I ask the question I asked before again?
Sure.
So you gave an example of in a social situation where you're dating, so you unconsciously send signals of wanting to connect or wanting to deepen the connection. That was the example you gave, where projective identification could be healthy and normal. How would that manifest in a therapy situation?
Patient wants your help with a certain issue, but they're really embarrassed to bring it up. And they find a way to bring you to bring it up. I can imagine a patient who is dressing seductively with a therapist, but who can't talk about sexuality.
Mm.
And the therapist notices this, but doesn't notice that he or she notices this right away. A patient struggles with anger and aggression and is hitting her kids and feels guilty that she's hitting her kids. She finds a way to signal to the therapist that she needs help with this, and she somehow gets that idea in the therapist's mind. She probably tells a story about kids, and the conscious version of the story is that, I am a good parent and I set my limits. But she tells it in a way that, like, she sounded really harsh. And I think that she doesn't know that she sounded that way, but I think she wanted the therapist's help with this. And then the therapist is like, huh, can you tell me again what you mean by that? Like what you said, you sort of like left something out of the story. And I'm wondering, but the therapist already has a fantasy. I think that this patient like just smacked around her daughter and feels really guilty about it. But she finds a way to sort of like get this in your mind in some way. And she might have to do it many times before you signal it. Or I'm speculating. I can think of some examples from my practice. I don't want to actually say them in the video just for people's privacy. But they find a way to get you to focus on something about them that they couldn't bring up themselves. I think that's a healthy form of unconscious communication. And sometimes it's like really hard to even know. I can think of actually another version. This I don't mind talking about. I had a patient who could not organize anything in his life. He was like completely floundering. He could never ever make it to any appointments on time. He lost jobs, he lost relationships. And he had sessions with me at about 10 or 11 in the morning. And he was so afraid of oversleeping sessions. What he did is he turned his entire life around. He stayed up all night long by brewing coffee starting at like 10 p.m. at night. And he drank coffee all night long. And then he would attend the session with me. Then he'd go home and go to sleep. And he said, I've turned my entire life around in order to attend sessions with you. But what he really suffered from was a fear of people being too important to him. And like he brought this to my attention by he had to like do such an exaggerated thing with me. He like basically made his whole life dysfunctional except for his psychoanalytic treatment with me. And he had to like show me that he turned his entire life around. So the only thing he did in life was basically come to me and he didn't do anything else. He had to do that in order for me to understand his fears of being too vulnerable to people. He made himself like hyper vulnerable to me. So like people do stuff and he couldn't talk about it really.
George British force.
What is that? There's something, I don't know what just happened. I think just heard something in the background. So I
So
think
his making himself hyper vulnerable to you
right.
was his way of communicating his fear of being vulnerable to anyone else?
Yes. Yes. He didn't know that he was communicating that to me. He basically showed me what he's afraid of happening by doing it with me. He's afraid of role models, afraid of mentors. And it's really how hungry he was for them. I guess this is somewhat of a convoluted example, but it was an example of projective identity. What I felt is very guilty that psychoanalysis has taken over his entire life. I felt like I'm so like, oh my gosh, like this is unhealthy. Like, how is he going to get his life together if he puts everything now, like clears the entire desk of all of his responsibilities except for me? Like, it made me worry, like, is this bad for him in some way? But he kind of made that happen. He made that happen.
How did you resolve it?
Just, a couple decades of psychoanalytic treatment.
For
I mean,
how long did he spend brewing coffee from 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. to see you?
oh, that resolved in
In
weeks or
years.
months.
Okay.
Weeks to months. That resolved
Okay.
quickly. That resolved quickly in weeks to months.
So you're basically saying that the healthy, normal function of projective identification is like a very subtle, nuanced
It's
form of it.
unconscious. It's unconscious. His wasn't very subtle, actually.
No,
His
this is
was
not
like really
subtle.
exaggerated, but it was unconscious. He didn't know he was doing that. And I didn't know he was doing that. I just like felt like really guilty that like I've taken over his life, you know? So he made me worry that I'm so dominating, so strong, so taking over his life, like then I realized, oh, this is actually, well, I was in supervision with a like, really wonderful supervisor that helped me understand this. But that's sort of how that's how projective identification works. So I think that it's healthful because they are bringing into therapy issues that they can't consciously talk about, like they're so ashamed of, they're so afraid of. That would be a healthful way in therapy. And in general, it's kind of all healthy in therapy because if patients regress more with you in therapy and you can talk about it, they regress less in their lives. So like people, they can get like kind of crazier with you in therapy, but they'll be a lot more rational and sane and responsible in the rest of their lives. So it's all to some degree welcome in therapy. It might not feel welcome when it's really unpleasant, but it's very helpful material to access.
Yeah, you just had a whole email thread on that.
Yes, I did. And regression.
Um, when clients bring into the room that like you're the only person in their life, and you start projecting, and is that also part of the projective identification?
I didn't understand what you said. They say that you're the
It's not
only.
they say when you feel, you notice, you're aware that they kind of, it's not a dependency, but it's more like the only space in their life, or the only place, the only person that they can.
You're saying
Um,
it's true. You know that they're that isolated, and you think that you're the only person that they have significant interactions with. You're saying that's the reality.
it's what I'm noticing.
But you're noticing it that it's real, or you're noticing that the patient feels that way and it's a distortion. I'm not sure what you're noticing. You believe this is actually true about their lives, or you think this is a fantasy that they feel this way about
No,
you, but it's not really true?
it's actually true.
Okay, so you think it's actually true. This is a person that's very, very lonely, has no one that really will listen to them or talk to them. You're the only person they can
Maybe
have certain.
someone they don't believe. It's a distortion also that nobody would listen, but eventually they became isolated.
Okay, and then what's your question about that?
Is that a projective identification as well?
It would only be a projective identification if they are doing something to you that makes you feel the way that they don't want to feel. Like if they are very lonely and they feel so lonely and they make you feel very lonely, like they make you feel that you're trying to reach them and be close to them, and they keep saying, no, you got it wrong. No, there's no point. My life is just always going to be sad, and you're not going to be able to help me. I'm not going to make friends because of you. And you feel like you're trying very hard to connect with them and they won't connect with you. And they feel this way about everyone in their lives and you feel that way about them. That would be a projective identification. But the fact in reality that you have a particular patient that has like really bleak, like empty life with no real relationships, and you're the only rich relationship, that is not a projective identification in itself. That is just the unfortunate reality that they don't have people that they're close to, and they have you. That's not a projective identification in itself. It's only if they're ridding themselves of unwanted feelings by getting you to feel a certain way.
And how do you work with that in countertransference, with that feeling?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get in this lecture, which is that you first notice that I'm trying so hard to reach this person and they keep rejecting me at everything I suggest. They say that's not going to work, or that's not how, no, that won't work. I know I can't say that to my mother. She'll just say this. No, I can't say that to my brother. He'll just do that. And then you talk to your supervisor about it and you're like, everything I try to do, he shuts down is a bad possibility. I'm feeling like hopeless. I'm feeling very hopeless. And then your supervisor works out a way. So, like over the last 3 months, you're here wanting to get closer to people in relationships. That's your goal. I've come up with a lot of possibilities to help you meet people or deepen the connection you have to people you already know. I suggested that you invite, Alan out for lunch. I suggested that you talk to your brother more, who always calls you and you never are available for him. I've suggested there are people you could have more to do with, and there are ways you could meet more people. And everything I bring up, you tell me it's not going to work. And I think you believe yourself at the time you're saying that, but I'm starting to feel like it's like very important to you to make me realize or feel that I can't help you. I feel like you resent the idea that you think my ideas might help you. And there's something important that you're doing that you're shutting me down from trying to help you anymore. And I don't know why it is. What is it that bothers you the idea that I think you could be close, that your brother loves you and he wants a relationship with you and he's trying and you're the one rejecting him. And when I point that out to you, why do you think you are pushing that out of your mind? I know you tell me all the reasons it won't work, but I really am not convinced. I actually don't believe you. I did but now that I see in the big picture that everything I suggest you're shutting down, I need to figure out with you why it's so important to you to portray yourself as beyond any help, or why it's so important to you to make me feel like I can't possibly help you. That's what's going on between us. You would find a way to say that that's how you would work with it. The goal is not to just make him more open to your solutions. The goal is for him to see that his problem is he shuts people out. And the way you're going to show him that is that he's shutting you out. You tried in good faith to help him make relationships with other people, but he shut you out. So you're going to talk about how he's shutting you out, because that's what he does. You're going to use his problem with you rather than keep talking about his problems with his brother, with his neighbor, with his friend. You're going to talk about how it happens with you. That's how you make use of it.
Malcolm?
Yes.
Something happened to me a few years ago, and I thought about this a lot since then in my own practice, and I raised it for that purpose. I was seeing my therapist, and I was feeling very hurt and vulnerable. Some deeper issues came up. And at the end of the session, I asked him, would it be okay if I gave you or you gave me a hug, if we have a hug, which I had never done before and I've not done since. He said, well, I'm happy to do that, but I want to talk like next time, like what this hug would mean to you, right? In other words, what am I trying to get from him? What issues of transference are coming up?
Let me just,
what relationship am I trying
I just want to clarify, I couldn't follow who offered whom the hug exactly.
I asked him, can we have a hug or something? I asked
You
him
as the
that.
therapist
The end of the
offered
session.
him a hug.
No, as
Yeah,
the
and I was
patient.
feeling like a little broken.
Oh,
Yeah.
you
Me as
as the patient, you asked your
I
therapist.
asked my therapist. And my
Okay.
therapist said, well, maybe we could, but I first want to talk about like what that mean to you and sort of like looking at it through like a therapeutic lens, like a transference lens, or other things might be going on that would require me, to ask him for a hug, right?
You got
So
the
in other
Heisman
words,
instead of a hug.
right. So I said, you know what, forget it. I said, forget it. Like, and I thought I was sort of always looking at things with the client through like a therapeutic lens, but then also wanting sometimes just to sort of have like a human reaction outside of the therapeutic lens in a way, and sort of, is it ever like exhausting to the client where like everything is sort of being put under the microscope as opposed to just sort of be able to have like a natural human reaction, and where is there sort of like room for that?
I can
So
tell
I
you
don't
what
know.
I
I was sort of
do.
thinking about that.
I can tell you what I generally do about hugs is I
But I mean, less about a hug, more sort of like being a human as opposed to always sort of looking at something through the
I don't
psychodynamic therapeutic lens.
I don't think I'm not being a human when I do it. I don't feel cold, distant, rejecting, robotic. I don't. I feel my spontaneous, emotional, connected self. I would probably say, like, well, I think we're not going to hug because I'm not really a hugger, but I really would like to know at this moment what you are feeling, because the way I think this works is that you are filled with some sort of feelings that will be reassured or soothed or relieved by a hug. If I were your friend or your brother, I would absolutely hug you, but I'm your therapist. So I feel like I can help you better by wondering what you need right now rather than giving it to you. And I don't feel not human by that. Like, I really don't. Now, it's not true that I've never hugged anybody before, but I have definitely said, I think we're not going to hug many, many times. And it's probably less than 5 times in, 26 years of practice that I've hugged people. And I certainly do not hug women because I think it could be really dangerous and could be really misunderstood. But I don't think that when you're using these techniques well, you will feel like you're rejecting somebody. I think that if you really understand why, and it's really like integrated into you, that it shouldn't feel that way to the patient, or even if it does, they should feel you're really trying to help them as much as you possibly can. And I think if people really believe you, that you're really trying to help them, not that you don't want to bother because you don't want to hug them for whatever, you don't want to bother. If they think you're really trying, I don't think it comes off as hurtful. Like, if you sincerely believe that's the best thing to do. That's I don't think that these techniques are not human. I think that it's still very human. It's just that you're being human as a therapist. You're not denying that you have feelings. You're just handling very real, powerful feelings as a therapist rather than as a friend or a lover or a neighbor or a child or a parent. I think that's how I view it. I don't think every hug is a problem. There are boundary crossings, and not every single moment can every feeling be examined. But if you feel like this is a moment that is full of lots of meaning and you could do something really worthwhile with it, I don't think it will come across that way. That's how I view it.
I
So
guess what I needed from that moment is to sort of step away from the pure therapeutic bounds. And then I guess I ask myself those same questions sometimes in my own practice, as far as, is there ever time to sort of back away from everything being grist for the mill and everything being something to be looked at, and then just be able to sort of tell somebody, you know what, I'm really proud of you, or something. In other words, like,
well, yeah.
to
So
me,
I've
this sort of
given.
feels like a tension as
I
far
think
as like
when we talked about
yeah.
boundaries, I gave an example where a patient came in and gave him a high five. Yeah, I think that's
Right.
normal. I don't regret that I did that. But if I'm being asked for a hug that doesn't feel to me like it's spontaneously coming out of something that's really between us, the patient is wanting a hug. I think my instinct will be like, I don't think we're going to hug, but I really want to know what's going on right now that you want to hug. Like, what are you feeling right now? Like, I think, a time you'd hug somebody, it's like you're saying goodbye after long therapy, or there's something going on that is like, it's very mutual that would happen. And if it doesn't feel mutual, I
Right.
think that you don't try to make yourself do what the patient's saying they need. I think if you're confused, you try to understand it. That's the best I can say. And I don't think that I feel though distant or distancing. I feel like there's something I don't understand. Like I don't know why he wants a hug from me right now. Like this does not feel like a huggable moment. I'm really confused. So I think that I'm doing my best as a human. Like that's a human being. I think hugging when it doesn't feel like a hug is not a human thing to do. I think that would be a robotic hug. It would be like, and then um, so I do need to stop. I'll see everybody next week.
Thank you so much.